some exotic booze. There's a bar in far Bombay. Come fly with me, let's fly away. Come fly with me, let's float down to Peru. In Lama Land there's a one-man band, and he'll toot his flute for you. Come fly with me, let's take off in the blue. Once I get you up there where the air is rarefied, we'll just glide starry-eyed. Once I get you up there, I'll be holding you so near. You may hear the angels cheer because we're together. Weather-wise, it's such a lovely day. Just say the words and we'll beat those birds down to Acapulco Bay. It's perfect for a flying honeymoon, they say. So come fly with me, let's fly away. Oh, come on and fly. as a kite by then. I miss the earth so much, I miss my wife. It's lonely out in space on such a timeless flight. And I think it's gonna be a long, long time till touchdown brings me round again to find I'm not the man they think I am at home. Oh no, no, no.
Hello, hello. We're only using the mic because we're streaming to Utah, Oregon, and all around Colorado. So, but some of us have the pleasure of being here in person today. You know, I'm Mark Hyatt. I'm the AeroLab guy, and what a treat we're in for today. This is amazing. We had about 50 people sign up, so I don't know where they went, but maybe they're streaming in. So, Michael and Mary Couillard. I met Michael 25 years ago. I was flying the motorized gliders out at the Air Force Academy. I think you were flying them too, weren't you? Yep. And so we were pilots in the Air Force together. I know I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East, too much time in Turkey actually, and a little bit in Syria, and a little bit in all that, but Michael was in Turkey, and you're going to hear the most amazing story. We started this adventure-based leadership class. How many of you are in that ABL? Just one. Oh gosh, I asked Dino and Ed to tell the students to come on over and hear the story, because they're all about orienteering, survival, first aid, wilderness cooking, all that, orienteering, and this is what this is all about, and a lot of providential from above. Oh man, this is a tearjerker story, and I first heard it 25 years ago when Michael was sharing it. I remember at the club, the Falcon Club at the Air Force Academy, and then I got to know him better. So, AeroLabs, almost everybody has a chance to fly in airplanes and gliders and helicopters and all that. And every time so far in the almost 6 years that we've had AeroLab, we land where we are supposed to land. And sometimes out there in the real world, you don't land where you're supposed to land, and you land somewhere else. It's called a forced landing. And you have to figure out how to get back to civilization. This fits in really well with what AeroLab's all about, because we care about survival, orienteering, and there's rocks and dirt roads involved. So Michael Couillard and Mary, come on up. They're going to do this as a team, and we're just so fortunate to have you here. Thank you very much. And we'll use the mics. Thank you.
If anybody wants to ask questions. Okay, go ahead.
This work? Okay.
3 mics. I'll do this. I'll be the audience guy when it's time.
Well, how many of you watched the video? Oh, that's good. Because I usually spend hours telling you about how I got lost. So I'm going to be spared of that. So we'll take the first slide. You probably saw in the video, this happened 28 years ago. And it happened between January 15th and we were found on January 24th, 1995. Next slide. I want to see if you have any questions at all about the video that you watched.
Any questions about the video? Otherwise, I'll go into their presentation. We can do Q&A afterwards.
So yeah, we'll definitely have room for questions afterwards. Next slide. So here's some questions to think about. Can you name a time when the weather caused you a challenge? Anybody? By a show of hands. Live in Colorado, so the weather always impacts our life, and especially the cold weather and the snow. Anyone ever been lost? Oh, someone. Good. I don't feel so embarrassed.
Pilots call it temporarily disoriented because we don't like to admit we're lost. Or challenged your safety, affected your plans, ever been stuck in a bad situation? Yeah, anyone want to share your story? Yes. So yes, pilots have to be very flexible with their decision making and where they're going, where they're navigating.
Did you guys know that we had no idea there was such a thing as that weather coming over the Black Sea? I mean, it makes sense because there's lake effect snow in like Chicago and New York and stuff, but we're Colorado skiers, so had no idea.
Yeah, just, I know that just driving in Colorado, I try to tell my grandkids that you really need to prepare like you're going to have an accident or you're going to walk. And our 15-year-old granddaughter, she doesn't ever want to take her coat. She's wearing short sleeves. And, oh my gosh. But if you're stuck, and there's so many things that could happen that are out of your control, then it'd be nice to have warm weather clothes. So I know I travel in the airplane and the car like I'm going to be doing what you're going to tell us about happened in the Middle East.
Our son Matthew, when we came back, the coolest thing to wear was white socks and those Adidas slip-on shoes. He wanted to wear that with his frostbite out at the bus stop in the snow. I'm like, not happening, dude. Sorry. Sorry. Tomorrow when the sun comes out and the snow melts, maybe, but not right now. We did our frostbite for this winter, so we're done.
So we weren't really dressed for a long-term survival. We had basically our ski jacket, our ski bibs, our ski boots, and I didn't have any kind of survival equipment with me, but now when I ski, of course it's been a long time since I've skied, but a fanny pack with all kinds of survival kit kind of items. When we travel, we have stuff in the car, things like that. So this really did impact us in a major way.
What do you guys
I don't
think?
know, I think a lot of times people, when they go downhill skiing, they don't really plan to survive for any length of time. It's not really part of the psychological makeup. So,
what kind of things do you pack in your fanny pack now?
What kind of things do you think would be good? What do you think they would have really wanted to have? Yeah,
something to make a fire.
Right.
That's really important.
Yeah.
Because as you probably saw in the video, if we had a way to make a fire, then that would have probably drawn attention to us, because a fire, just smoke coming out of in the middle of nowhere would have probably attracted the attention of the helicopters that were searching for us. So,
The other thing they would have given their right arm for was some dry socks. Dry socks. Because even if they were dry, after you stick them in ski boots for hours, they're going to be sweaty. And that's not going to be the best. Yes?
Yeah, so back to the mountain flying, teaching mountain flying, even in the middle of summer, July, we go fly in the mountains. I have a saw, I have waterproof matches, I have a couple of bottles of water, and I have a big bag with all my ski clothes in it. And we just toss it in the back of the airplane, just in case we would need. So we're not taking what we know we need, we're taking what we might need.
absolutely.
Forced landing
That is true. Reels. Okay. Can you guys think of anything else? Yes? Uh-huh.
Curious how this affected our son Matthew. Well, I think the good thing that happened when we were rescued was that they had some psychological help for us. So one of the stories, the psychologist went over with my son Matthew was, he said, you know, think about going up this mountain and you start at the bottom and you come to a fork in the road and you make a turn. And you have to just make a choice. And then you come to another fork in the road and you eventually get to the top of the mountain. And then you get to the top of the mountain and you look down and you see where you should have made a left instead of a right, and you should have made a right instead of a left. But the important thing is you got to the top of the mountain. And so he used that story to tell us, and of course I was listening. And I had a lot of self-blame. How could I get ourselves into a situation where we were having to, fend for our lives? And the thing that story did to me was it told me that, you know what, I did things enough over and over again to survive the situation with him. And so I think that helped. Some of the early, sort of psychological intervention really helped us sort of forgive ourselves and helped me to forgive myself for getting in the situation, because I got us out of the situation. So it's a good question. Thank you.
Some of the stuff that's not like in the book or in the YouTube is, that just imagine you're in Turkey and you get sent to an Air Force base and there's a trauma surgeon psychologist on staff. What do you think the odds are of that? And then there's a child psychologist on staff that's worked in a cancer ward, so he's worked with some pretty tough situations. And so we got all that intervention, and people were just it was like we were part of their community. And so that was good. And we're pretty happy with the way things went in the short term. And so fast forward, we moved back to Colorado Springs. Matthew's first writing assignment in school is to write about when he's encountered some bad weather and what he did and what he would do differently as a sixth grader. And you can imagine. So he elbows the kid next to him that he doesn't know from Adam. He goes, I know what I'm going to write about. I'm going to write about the 10 days I was lost in the snow. And the kid goes, nah. And Matthew goes, yeah, I'll show you my foot. Because he did lose his little toe and the top of his fourth toe. But we went back in 2015 to try to find the cave. We did not find the cave, but we did. We had a guide who spoke Turkish and English, and he was trying to, he was like, what would you say, going in the woods kind of guide. So he could read maps and all that. So he's trying to help us find this cave. We didn't find it, but he goes over to the little sheep herder over here, shepherd, and starts talking to him, 100 miles an hour in Turkish. Hey, do you know anything about da-da-da-da-da? He goes, oh, yeah, absolutely. All the people that rescued them are from this village called blah, blah, and it's over there. So we pile in our cars, drive over, and get to meet every single person that saved them. except for the oldest guy, who was very old when it happened, and this is 20 years later, so he wasn't still around. And then the youngest guy had become a police officer in Istanbul, so when we went to fly out of Istanbul, we got to meet him. So we didn't get to find the cave, but we got to meet all the people, and he was showing these guys. I mean, he was this skinny 10-and-a-half-year-old, and now he's this honking 30-something-year-old with a beard. He's a pretty husky kid, and he's taking his shoe off and showing him his foot and everything. So, I think he's okay. He's a very introverted child that I know it probably made him more so, but he's good.
So I'll take the next slide here. So how did we got lost? How did we get lost? Well, we were caught in a blizzard, as you saw in the video. This thing called the Mista, what the Turks call the Mista. It was air off the Black Sea came and obscured. Basically, we got caught in a blizzard, and it was just a heavy snow. And if you've ever been caught in a whiteout, if you've ever been skiing and you get so much snow going on that you can't see but maybe 10 feet in front of you, that's kind of what happened to us. We lost all of our references to stay oriented. For a long time, I was looking at the ski lift, the chairlift that took us up to the top of the mountain. I could see that in the distance, but then eventually the snow got so thick I couldn't see that anymore, so we stopped. We ended up going down what I thought was the trail to the bottom of the mountain where the resort was, but we ended up off to the as I was skiing down the mountain off to our right side. We kept going further and further right, and that's kind of the way the slope of the land was taking us. And so when I realized we were sort of getting off track, I stopped and we sidestepped up the mountain. That's in the movie.
So don't get stuck there.
And I won't get too stuck there, but long story made short is that we ended up going downhill, and I figured it wasn't long before we ended up on a road. It was a logging road, and I figured, if we stay on that road long enough, we're going to find ourselves out. We're going to find ourselves, one road will lead to another, and we'll hopefully catch somebody coming down the road and hitchhike back up to the top. Of course, we went hours and hours, and I didn't know quite how far we'd gone, but we'd gone 12 miles by the time we stopped. When Matthew couldn't go anymore, I just decided to make shelter, and I took a bunch of branches from the surrounding trees, and I took our ski poles and our skis and I wove them into the tree and made like a roof above us. And then I put, what do you think the most important thing I could have done? So I'm making a shelter. I haven't mentioned it yet, but what would be an important thing to do? What you're laying on, because you can lose a lot of body temperature through the cold of the snow. So I made a bed of branches underneath us, and that's how we spent the first night. And all that night I kept seeing light from the bottom of the ground that we were on, and I had no idea what that was. But the next morning I got up and I kind of scurried down the hill, and what it was a crack where two boulders were met, and it made a cave, like a little cave, just big enough for the two of us to
Not quite as
get
big
in.
as on the video.
Yeah, the movie made it look like a
You
big.
couldn't really go inside.
And so, that really, I think, had a lot to do with our surviving intact. We really a lot of frostbite. I think if we had not had that kind of shelter, we would have been a lot worse off. So, next slide. So the challenges we faced, I'd like to open it up for your thoughts on that. What do you think our biggest challenges were?
Well, I think this applies, when the Turkish men came to the cabins, the village, abandoned them, how was the communication? And then how long did it take for them to find that cave where your son was? It seemed like, I didn't catch that in the video.
Okay, so the two questions, how basically was it when they found me and I was able to communicate? That's how. And what was the other question? It was
How long to get to Matthew?
how long to get to my son Matthew. So fortunately, we had 6 months of Turkish language training.
Just the two of us with one teacher. Obviously, no hiding going on when you're called upon. So
Mary was the better student, but I still remembered enough Turkish to be able to communicate pretty clearly. I could say, there's if you go out the cabin, there's a road that goes up the hill, and there's a barbed wire fence on the left side, there's a stream on the right side, follow that, and I have my skis planted, Matthew's skis were planted as an X in the road that marked our location.
just a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
As he was saying, there was a lot of providential stuff. Like, getting 6 months of Turkish training was awesome. I remember the day we learned everything you could learn about snow. Every word about snow and skiing and this and that, it's like, wow, okay, we'll spend some time. I think we were in Virginia the year they had that huge blizzard, and so I think it was just part of the topic that came up. So we, we're, in retrospect, we're like, well, yay! But the same thing with the tree. How is it that the one tree they stopped under was the tree above the cave? It just, the whole story is like that. So it's like, thank God. So, what kind of, back to, yes.
Well, Mary, you were back in Ankara, right?
Uh-huh.
I mean, what was it like? How did you feel? It must have been the toughest thing you've been through in your whole life.
Yeah, what's really interesting is after all this was over, we went to actually, meet the Prime Minister of Turkey, who at that time was a female, Tansu Çiller, and she had come to school here in the States, so she spoke wonderful English, but they honored the soldiers, they honored the woodcutters, they honored all these people, and the lights were on and the cameras, and it was like they got little awards, and it was a big deal. It was a big deal. We're at, her house, and like going to the White House, basically. And so when it's all done, the lights are off and the cameras are put away, she leans over and she goes, "How was it for you, Mary? I have 2 sons. How was it?" So yeah, it was tough, because the ski area is about as far away as, like, say, going to Vail from here, about 2-3 hours. And I can't obviously go up there. No, they're not going to let me do that. At one point, they actually wanted me to go back to the States and wait. I go, hey, not happening, not happening. Fortunately, I had already arranged, my sister and her husband had come out the fall before, so they had passports and stuff. I made arrangements for my sister to come out, and she was actually, I can't believe I caught her before she got on the plane the day they were rescued. But I said, nope, it's not happening. My sister's coming out. If somebody needs to be with me, we're ready to go. They were actually planning a group to come up from the hospital to, like, prepare me for the worst. but it didn't happen. So we just did a lot of praying, mostly, and try to be hopeful, and people were wonderful, very supportive.
And then, Michael, leaving your son in the cave, I just don't know if I could have done that. How did it feel? What was it like?
Well, we were, by the time I started thinking about leaving him behind, it had been 7 days. So this is day 7 that I realized, of course, by the 7th day, we've had 3 helicopters fly overhead directly. And I had a little Sprint card in my wallet. It was like an aluminum surface where I figured if I could almost use it like a survival mirror. I bet that's one of the things in your survival kit is a survival mirror, signal mirror. But the 3 times they flew directly overhead, and I surmised that they weren't actively searching for us at the time, but were going for gas or whatever. But I was unable to get their attention. So by the time I decided to go, it had been 7 days, and I didn't make that decision lightly. I had gotten to the top of a plateau that I hadn't been able to get. Over the course of those days, I was hiking all over the place trying to find, a pathway back to civilization. And in the process of hiking in my ski boots, not the greatest things to hike around in, but I was able to get up on top of this plateau and I could see some cabins. And that was kind of the game changer. It looked to me like it was very likely that they were inhabited and I could go for help. I knew that the road that Matthew and I skied that first night, if I just kept going down that road to those cabins, it was probably 3 miles away, and I figured I could probably send help back. So that was really the thing. Had it not been for that, I think we would have stayed together, and I don't know, the story would have ended differently, but I don't know how. But basically,
but you
it
asked
was,
Matthew.
Yeah, thank you. Oh gosh, I asked Matthew, there's these cabins. What do you think about me going for help? And he says, you know what, Dad, if you don't go for help, they're probably going to find our bodies in the spring. So I guess I couldn't ask for a clearer answer to that
He was
question.
11 years old, or 12?
He was 10 years old.
10 years old.
10 and a half. And so I left him my jacket, and I went basically, got my skis on and went for help. As I got to the cabins, it was disappointing to find that there was nobody there. As it showed in the video, that was just an abandoned logging camp that was used in the summertime.
Well, another providential thing is the weather in Turkey is a lot like Colorado, where you can have a blizzard, and a big blizzard for days, and then the sun comes out and it's, clear blue skies, and you go about your business. And so they got sent to go cut some wood in the dead of winter because it was nice weather. Thank God, So, anyways.
So other challenges do you think we might have faced while we were lost? Yes.
A lot would be mental.
This is just for the Zoomers. There's people zooming in.
A lot would be mental. How do you fight with your anxiety, your fear, and you don't want to show that to your son, but he's doing it too.
Yes, mental is a big part of it. They talk about the will to survive. I'll get to that a little later in the story here. Mental is a big part of it, yes. Other challenges?
I would think just over time, just over time, the weakness from not having, food and enough water, and just a weakened state of your body.
Good, good point. So as the days go on, you're not eating and you're getting weaker. And I definitely felt that when I went. When I went for help, I had to stop every like 10 minutes. I was just really kind of exhausted.
He said, I'm going downhill. I'll just go downhill and I'll get there. Did not happen like that. Did not.
Other challenges? Yes.
From a mom standpoint, Mary, even for you, just that mental part for the kids that were with you, to keep that strength
Right.
and not show your fear, because you had to be having a lot of fear that you didn't want your kids to see, to stay strong.
Well, at one point, I think you saw that our oldest stayed up with his friend and mom for a couple days. And then, so I only had our probably 8-year-old at the time. At one point, one of my friends goes, let's go in the bedroom and you should have a good cry. And I go, maybe that is a good idea. And I started crying, but then it sounded really like somewhere between laughing and crying, and then I realized it was like hysterical, and I said, okay, now we're done. So yes, I did try to keep things kind of congruent for the 2 kids that were there, and we did do a lot of praying, and eventually it got kind of long, and so then somebody invited Lion King was coming to Turkey with English subtitles, so she got to go off and do that, but we're also concerned because, I don't know how much they said in the video, I don't remember, that somewhere in there they were talking about them being kidnapped and stuff, and so we didn't think much of it. It sounded like another one of those, oh yeah, we found a backpack, was it theirs? No. So it sounded like a story. Well, only problem is one of my friends was friends with an Israeli person, and she was getting the information about the kidnapping on her Israeli news. So that made it seem like a little more like it could be, but of course, everybody was working. You just, you saw the soldiers and stuff like that, but the military Office of Special Investigations, OSI, was doing a lot of stuff. Sprint would not release if the phone card had been used without a subpoena. This is, 28 years ago, and they wouldn't do that without a subpoena. So there was, roadblocks. At the same time, they're working everything, like every credit card that was, everything I knew that was in his wallet, was it being used? Could they have been kidnapped? All that. They're researching all that the whole time. And we're just kind of having people come, and of course they were feeding us, and then some people were coming and praying, and then they had a big service of hope the day before they were rescued. And so there's tons and tons. Like, I'm still on the phone with the person telling me they're lost, and people are coming in the door. So
I was very grateful to hear later that, what kind of help and support that Mary had. I think that's kind of the thing we maybe used to take for granted in the military, but if you're thinking of going in the military, I'd say you're thinking pretty well, because there is such a family and community when you serve in the military, especially overseas. I think even more so. And Mary got a lot of support while we were lost.
I want to say one thing before you take your question. The one thing that kept me sane was I knew he would never leave Matthew alone. And the good news is that Mike was able to call me on some kind of weird, funky phone as they were taking him from the cabin to the forest rangers' bigger establishment. And, just think of a national park, and there's a bigger building somewhere, And so while they're taking him there, he's in the mountains and he's talking to me, and he tells me that he doesn't know where Matthew is, that he sent the guys up to find him. I never heard any of that. Thank God. I had no idea they were not together until they were physically in front of me in the hospital in southern Turkey. So, definitely part of the sanity. Yes. Yeah, let's.
So I'm going to interject. They took me up to this, I guess, the forestry region office. And then it was, I would say, getting back to your question, it was about an hour and a half, I think, by the time they were able to find Matthew, pretty quickly, I think. And they brought him in and put him on my lap. Of course, I needed a bunch of these. I couldn't really contain myself. But they...
hour and a half from when you were found, or an hour and a half to find him?
I think it was about an hour and a half by the time I was found and taken. It wasn't a really long drive down the mountain, but it was, just a little drive. And then I was listening on shortwave radio when they found him. So about an hour and a half when they found him, and then, it was later they were able to, bring him to me. Yeah, I knew that I saw his face, and
but you had heard on the radio.
What's that?
You had heard on the radio.
I had heard on the radio
that they had found him alive.
They had found him, and he was there.
There's a question back in the gray sweater.
You have a question first?
Oh,
I was wondering if you could share about the moment you found out about them being alive.
it's really interesting because people were calling and telling me this and that and the other thing. But anyway, all along. But then the morning they were rescued, a friend called and said, and I wish I had the exact scripture, but I don't. It's in Daniel, and she goes, I was reading Daniel today, and every time we had prayed, we felt like there was still hope, and so she said, well, this morning when I was reading Daniel, it said that the angel was able to break through on the 24th day of the first day of the month.
The first month.
No, sorry, 24th day of the first month of the year. Sorry, I said that wrong. So that was that day. She goes, so they're going to get rescued today. And I said, okay. and then sure enough, like a few minutes later, I get a phone call, and they say that they found them and they're alive and everything. So a few minutes later, somebody came to the door, and she goes, Mary, they're going to get rescued today. I go, they already got rescued. She goes, oh, because I was reading Daniel, and the angel's coming. So 2 separate people got that scripture, and it was about how Daniel was waiting for the angel in waiting, and it couldn't break through because this spirit, which I don't know is exactly over Turkey, but that the Bible could have, it didn't have it on January 24th, had it on the 24th day of the first month of the year, which is when they were rescued. So it was pretty glorious, and I'm trying to get a hold of my sister. It's kind of nerve-wracking because she's lived in LA, so it wasn't like she was coming from Germany or somewhere. She's coming from a long ways away, so I'm trying to take care of that and tell the kids and jumping for joy and all that. So.
Yeah, so this is a question for Michael. Because the movie doesn't really give a lot of detail about your physical condition. Like, what was your decision? Because, I told my boys watching that part of the movie, I said, I would have carried you down. I said, I would have skied down with you. I said, I would not have left you. I said, I would have carried you down. But I know that I've been in situations where my kids carry me, and I'm just on a mountain with them, and I'm like, okay, I'll carry you. And then I realize that I don't have enough oxygen for myself and him. And I'm sorry, bud, you got to do it yourself. But so I won't judge, but what kind of physical condition did you feel like you were in that led you to think that you could not carry him down and that you had to go alone?
I had actually tried to carry him that night we were skiing, trying to find the road out. And I put him on my back, and he was a big kid, so put him on my back, and I tried moving forward, but I sank down into the snow. And so I tried that several times. And I sometimes, we wrote a book about this story, and it was an opportunity to revisit all those decisions that I made. There's one part of me that said, well, why didn't I just, sidestep all the way back up to the top of the ski lift before we got lost? It was kind of one of those things that we gradually got more and more lost. And, then it was a matter of, when we stopped that night, it was kind of like it hit me with a ton of bricks that we were in a survival situation. I think up until then, the go, 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 let's get us out of here kind of thing kept me moving forward and trying to bring Matthew along with me. He had to ski behind me, but so it was I guess kind of surprising that we'd gone that many miles away. What entered my mind, I had kind of permission, I guess, from him to go for help, knowing that I couldn't carry him. And then my thought was that first night, I figured I would probably go back up the hill to get Matthew and bring him down to the cabin. But my feet had swollen. They were probably about a third again the size of normal. And so I couldn't put ski boots back on, so I couldn't.
Well, you couldn't walk.
I couldn't walk, basically. Yeah, it was kind of one of those things that I was stuck. And you talk about, some really heartfelt prayers. God help me because, I'm in this situation and I've done everything I think I can do, but I still am not getting the job done. So, thanks for the question.
Well, as a father, it's so hard, and moms that are here. But Mary, you said you had comfort knowing that he'd never leave Matthew. And then when you found out he did, but it all worked out, just how'd that feel? Because I still don't know if I could leave my kid.
Yeah. I don't know, I guess, because it worked out by that time.
Okay, and maybe that's just
good choice. Good
water
choice.
under the bridge.
Like I was just telling somebody the other day when we were writing the book, I was reading the draft, and I had no idea. At one point, Mike had dislocated his hip and kind of had to put it back in there himself. And he had never told me this, and this is 2 years later, And so, that, I don't know if that was part of it or not, but if you're skiing downhill and you have to stop every 10 minutes to get some oxygen and feel like you can keep moving, you're probably not carrying somebody, he left everything, all the gear, everything that was warm, he left with him except, his pants and his turtleneck, So he thinks Matthew's in this cave. We lived there, 8 days by this time, or 7, plus the tree, So my thinking is I wasn't there. I wasn't there. And everybody can second guess, and you just have to make the best decisions at the time with the information you have. That's all you could do.
That's why they call it 20/20 hindsight.
Yeah. Yeah. So no, I had been in Civil Air Patrol, so I had some survival training myself. One thing Michael didn't say is that everything he knew about winter survival had been in a classroom. So just because you learn something in a classroom doesn't mean you shouldn't be paying strict attention and, you know, taking mental notes, if not written notes, because you don't know when you're going to use them. But the colonel in charge came and told me on Wednesday that they were probably dead. And I'm thinking, like, I'm pretty sure I'd still be alive, and I haven't had anywhere near the training Michael's had as a pilot, you know? So, yeah, there were some moments that I'd like to erase from my mind. But I don't know, I guess, because I didn't know any better till after the fact. I didn't have any, you know, it's like, hey, you know, I wasn't there. You got to do what you got to do in the moment. We probably should keep going.
I'm going to go ahead and take I'm just going to tell you the challenges we faced, if you can get the next slide. Okay, well here's the summary if you want to just look at them. Biggest thing was we were fighting against the cold and hypothermia, frostbite, cold weather, harsh environment, limited resources. I didn't have anything in terms of a survival kit. I didn't realize how your ski clothes, they soak up water. I didn't realize how big a challenge that would be, just keeping ourselves warm. We had, our socks were wet, you know, and I had to basically just kind of make do with the clothes that we had. Eventually our socks dried out because we were laying on them, but, you know, I'll just stop at that. That's kind of the summary of the next slide. There's sort of the threes of survival. Humans can survive 3 minutes without air. Of course, we didn't have any problem. Air was kind of mostly, 3 minutes without air, 3 hours in a harsh environment. We definitely had a harsh environment. And so it was very necessary to make a survival shelter. Humans can survive 3 days without water. Fortunately, there was a stream right nearby. And then humans can survive 3 weeks without food. So although we were thinking about food all the time, it really didn't, it really wasn't an important thing for us at this point. Next slide. So keep breathing, just stay calm, find or make shelter. Hopefully, you know, the next time I go skiing or in a cold weather situation, better winter clothing, stay hydrated. We didn't want to eat snow because that just lowers the body temperature and, you know, makes you more prone to hypothermia. And then, like I said, although food was in our minds, it wasn't that important. Next slide, please. Okay. So the one right turn that I made, I talked about the one wrong turn where we ended up on the back. I had no idea we were on the back side of the mountain. But the right turn that I made was I turned to God, and actually He turned to me. This was on the 7th day, the middle of the night. I woke up, I got out of the cave and looked at all these, you know, if you ever been camping, you see the Milky Way with all those billions of stars. And it caught my attention. It was kind of like, it brought me to the story of Abraham. And Abraham said, God said to Abraham, look up into the sky, your descendants will outnumber all of these stars that you're seeing. And it was kind of like God, I don't think He physically shook me, but it was mentally, He just shook me and said, you know what, I have a promise for you, Michael. And it brought me back to about a year before we were in a Bible study. I had this job that was in Turkey. Things don't move very fast. Americans are, you know, get it done now kind of folks. In Turkey, you know, you don't really make any decisions until you go and sit down and drink chai with the head of the whatever program you're trying And it was like that. I was just stressing out on the job because things weren't that easy to do. And someone in the Bible study shared with me this scripture, and it was Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans that I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. And that spoke to me volumes about what God wanted me to, how he wanted me to just be. It just, what went through my logical mind was, well, if God doesn't mean for me to have disaster and he means for me to prosper, I need to get engaged. And so it was actually the next day that I went for help. So that had a lot to do with, my will to survive and turning that will to survive and into action. So some conclusions, and then we'll take some more questions. First of all, if you are lost and you can't find shelter, you're going to make shelter, and that's what I did. Let the rescuers find you. Of course, that would have been a lot easier job if I hadn't moved so far, and I knew that. But it turns out, actually, that the search team were within a quarter mile of us on 2 separate days because we got to compare notes. And they showed me the map where they had come, and we weren't that far off from being rescued. Did you have a comment?
Oh, I was just going to say that one of the things you did with the shelter that I don't know if it was on the video was that he made like a little branch door to the cave. Since it wasn't really a cave you go inside of, they needed still protection on the outside. So he did that too, to just keep the cold out.
Keep reassessing the situation. I think that's kind of what I did, after days of just sitting, which was hard for me. I tend to not sit still very long, but reassessing the situation for me was eventually I figured out that I needed to go for help. I really think that was the right decision because we would have never had people come down a road if I hadn't been in those cabins and find me. So finding me, made it possible for them to find Matthew. The hardest decision I've ever made. I think the biggest thing in a survival situation is never give up. And I got to the point where I was weary, but I never gave up. And I think God had a lot to do with that, especially that seventh day when he spoke to my heart. And, the other thing is that you're stronger than you think. I've had people come up to me and say, how did you do that? And it's kind of like you do what you got to do when you got to do it. And I had no idea, what I had to do, that I would be demanded to do. But you do what you do to survive. You're stronger than you think. A little bit of knowledge goes a long way. I think the thing that Mary said, this was all classroom training. I didn't have winter survival, actual hands-on training, but this is a good thing for you to remember to pay attention in class, because even in a classroom situation, you're learning some pretty vital things. Did you have a...
Do you guys have any more questions?
How did your oldest son do? Because I can imagine I have kids who beat themselves up thinking they should have done more. How was that for him coming home and feeling like he went off with his friends, or did he struggle with that at all?
Since I wasn't with him the first little bit, I can't really say, but he's pretty much the most practical person you know. So he, you know, I think he got good support being with his buddy and the buddy's mom. I mean, they were very close. So I think that helped. And, you know, of course, they weren't going to let him actually go hunt for them. That was, of course, frustrating. But, you know, in the big scheme of life, you know, makes sense. So, no, he's a very spiritual kid, too. And he thought one of them couldn't walk, which was true. And he believed they were near a fence, which they were. So he was, I think he was hopeful, knowing bits that some of the rest of us didn't know.
Question over here.
So, what was it like to having frostbite with you and Matthew?
What was it like with frostbite? Well, I think the biggest thing for Matthew, well, so let me say, I think the reason why he got frostbite on one foot more than the other foot. And it was because I had left him a jacket. My jacket actually was kind of a godsend because it was big enough where it wrapped him all the way up. And the times, I think what happened is one of his feet ended up kind of coming out of the jacket, and that's how he got really more severe frostbite on his right foot than his left. And so for him, I think he actually tried to go for help, you know, kind of following in his old man's footsteps, I guess. But he couldn't go, he couldn't walk. And so that actually, I think about what a godsend that was, because, you know, a 10-year-old trying to find help, he probably would have been in a lot worse shape. So I was glad that he actually couldn't walk. So what the frostbite did to me was I think the biggest thing is it didn't let me go back and get him. And that was the hardest thing in the whole story.
So he could not feel anything in the right foot. So he had no pain associated with his frostbite. What was really interesting is his doctor was a little kooky, but she was the only one that had ever actually seen frostbite in the flesh. She'd been stationed in Alaska. Everybody else, it was book learning. So she kept telling him, you should be happy, though, that you're not having any pain, because they have to take the dead skin off. It's called debriding. And when she was doing that, it didn't hurt because he couldn't really feel it. And she kept telling him, well, if this was a burn, which is frostbite is similar to a burn, if it was a burn, you would feel it and you'd be really sad. What was crazy is when we ended up getting airlifted out of Turkey on a medevac because they started oozing unclear fluids in March sometime. So they got rescued late January. Almost to the minute, they both started oozing this stuff. And to be perfectly honest, not too gross, it kind of looked like pus. And so then you think they have infected feet. Turned out that it was only the bone getting sloughed off because it had been frozen and disintegrated and was taking the path of least resistance out of the body through one of the wounds. So we get medevaced out of there, and there's 2 burn patients on the same flight. And they are wrapped from head to toe because they were in a gas explosion, you know, with the heating, you know, something in their house, you know. They didn't like the thing right, and it exploded. So he got to see what a burn patient looked like, and he goes, they were right. I'm glad I have frostbite instead of a burn. God bless him, poor little kid. But, and then Michael actually, they said his wounds looked like diabetic pressure wounds because his feet were not getting the circulation they needed like a diabetic. And then he's rubbing and rubbing and rubbing them by hiking around in ski boots, you know, rather than tennis shoes or hiking boots even. So he ended up having to get a skin graft on his left foot because he had an exposed tendon. So, but in the big scheme of life, it wasn't like it was painful. Is that what you're kind of asking? Yeah, it wasn't, you weren't in too much pain, were you?
No, I wasn't really in too much pain. It was just my frostbite was on the sides of my feet. I didn't lose any toes, you know, like the classic frostbite. So, yeah, it was just a matter. I think it was a slow healing process, and they don't cut stuff off. They just kind of see how you recover and see. And it took probably weeks for us to really figure out what our ultimate situation would be. And I've actually been able to run and ride my bike, and you know, it's like I didn't really lose function in the long scheme of things. So I'm grateful for
Matthew was wall climbing for his birthday in May of that year. So, in the big scheme. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay.
What was the first thing you ate when you got back?
Matthew had a long list of things. First thing that we ate.
Well, he tried to do the clear liquid diet because he knew that was best. Well, Matthew wasn't having any of that. By the time they got Matthew to Michael, Matthew'd already had Turkish breakfast, which is kind of odd. So it's feta, cheese, tomatoes, cucumbers, bread, maybe a boiled egg. I don't know what these guys had left in their little knapsacks, but they offered him a kind of a classic Turkish breakfast, and of course he ate it like, you know, it was going out of style. And they were so impressed. He was like a little ambassador because he thought Turkish breakfast was yummy. Well, first of all, you know, we'd lived all over and traveled all over with the Air Force, and he was, you know, he'd had it before, so it wasn't like it was completely foreign. And when you're starving, heck, he didn't care. So he ate right away and had gastrointestinal problems right away. And then Michael tried to do the clear liquid diet thing, and it didn't really matter because by the time he got to solids, you had your own problems, right? Yeah. So Matthew, though, oh my gosh. Just imagine you're in southern Turkey in January, and by the time I get there, he's already had a hamburger, a milkshake, and a Coke. And some fries, I think. But he was asking for things that he wanted. And one of the things he wanted was pumpkin pie, and I don't know how they found it. But they made him a pumpkin pie. So it was awesome. You know, when you're starving, you're pretty excited. Are you next?
Why didn't your other son go with you on the, when you got lost, why didn't he go with you on the last ski trip?
He was smarter than his other brother.
He was with some friends, so he was older. You know, he was 13, so he was hanging out with his buddies. And they went one direction, and Michael was with Matthew. There's some debate. It was a bunch of people who were in Boy Scouts, but it wasn't like any kind of Boy Scout sanctioned activity, so that's why Marisa and I weren't there. But, boy, people were like, be sure not to say it was a Boy Scout thing, you know.
I appreciate y'all sharing your testimony and incorporating that into today. One of my burning questions was how you mentioned a few things. You had learned the language a little bit. You had some preparatory classes, but throughout, do you see, when you look back, do you see anything that God was preparing you for this big climax moment in your life with the surviving? To prepare, and your son, like, the character that he had to say what he did to you and to, of course, stay alive, do you think anything major?
That's a really awesome question, but.
I think that just having this as a cornerstone to, you know, the challenges that you face in life, it's nice to know that God's always with you. And sometimes I need to be reminded of that, even though we've been through this pretty major life story. it's kind of going back to that and saying, you know, if God took care of us then, I think he can probably take care of us now.
I don't think of anything, though, that, like, besides your scripture that you were reminded of, I don't think there's anything like that you don't feel like there was anything that was like, except, of course, for survival training and things like that, you know, but I don't think there was anything that you can think of that said, okay, you're ready for this. It just happened. Of course, God probably was working on it. We just didn't know. So.
Do you still have the letter that you wrote together in the cave to your loved ones?
Yes. That ended up being published in our book, one word after the other. Yes, thank you.
So my question was, just real quick along those lines, is were you at all disappointed that in the, you know, I Shouldn't Be Alive series, that they omitted anything about God? Because like I remember thinking, why is it like I'd be praying my heart out if I was her, and you know, and hearing your story now in person, I see that you did. But did you ever regret that they wanted to omit that from the story, or was that your choice?
It wasn't my choice, no. I think were disappointed that, you know, of course, when we wrote the book, that became kind of the focal point of the whole story. But yeah, some of these secular things that we did, it was disappointed that they left the God part out of it. When we first were rescued, Dateline, on the other hand, I mean, without soliciting, you know, they let me just say everything I wanted to say, and God was definitely a part of that. And at the end of it, they said, you know, they had angels looking out for them. And so they actually added some God stuff into the story that we didn't add. And so that was heartening, I think.
One of the reasons we use the one that we use is because it's just the most comprehensive, and of course it added all that scientific frostbite stuff in there so that it's, you know, so you get kind of the most of the story. And it's not, you know, really in the big scheme of life about the only thing that's, you know, is you can't really get inside that cave they were in, you know. But otherwise, it's pretty close. And so, yeah.
Well, I know that, you know, we're getting towards the end here, but I know you'll stay and if you want to talk. But when I first heard Michael's story 25 years ago up at the Air Force Academy, I don't know, I have a weird memory, but I remember your three main points were talk to God, listen to God, and then act on what God tells you to do. I've remembered that for 25 years, and I'll remember it for the rest of my life. Thank you so much, Michael and Mary, for doing this.
You're welcome.
We're all better people for having heard your story. So they'll be here.